They found the road choked with stakes before they saw the man who had ordered them. From a ridge, the forest looked like a crown of broken spears, each shaft topped with a pale face, a shoe, the ragged edge of a tunic. The air smelled of pine and something fouler beneath it, old blood, the slow iron of sun on metal. Crows argued over the branches like small, obscene juries. This is where rumor meets ledger, where a ruler's calculation becomes a landscape of suffering. The name most often used is Vlad Vlad the Impaler, the voivode of Wallachia, whose methods terrified armies and courtiers alike in the 15th century. What we must do as we walk into that forest is keep our facts close and our cautions closer. Contemporary accounts come from enemies and allies, from Ottoman chronicles and German merchants, each with their grievances and agendas. Some describe horrors in ledger-like detail, others lean toward legend. Where certainty thins, I will tell you it thins. Where the archive is blunt, I will say so plainly. If the sight of power translated into such intimate terror grips you, and if you want histories told like candlelight spreading across a map, press like and subscribe now. Stay with me. We will move from the first stake to the last ledger entry, listening for the small human sounds beneath the clatter of history.
Picture the voivode's hall at dawn. Torches guttering against cold stone, the voivode's counselors bending toward parchment. The hush before a command is given that will echo through valleys. Vlad III, often called Vlad Tepish, for the practice that marked him, ruled during a century of fractured borders and relentless pressure from the Ottoman Porte. To understand why he and his contemporaries chose terror as an instrument, we must smell the smoke of pillaged fields, hear the clank of shackles, and feel the hunger of a polity hemmed by empire. The chapter will reconstruct recruitment and reprisal, how traitors were identified, how deserters and raiders were chosen as examples, and will place those choices in geopolitical context without flattening them into inevitability. Contemporary accounts, Saxon merchants, Hungarian annalists, Ottoman chroniclers, record raids, betrayals, and retaliations, but each narrator presses the events through their own need to vilify a rival, to justify a campaign, to warn a population. I will examine the documentary traces available, the diplomatic letters, mercantile reports, and later chronicles, flagging where claims are contested and where legend has fused with record. Above all, this chapter is grounded in the human calculus that makes terror payable, how a leader balances immediate security against moral cost, how communities become both instruments and victims of such calculus, and how a single decree can seed a forest of stakes that will stand long after smoke clears.
Impalement was not simply an act of instinctive cruelty. It required men to fell poles, to sharpen timbers, to haul and lift bodies, work done by the same hands that tilled fields or rowed boats. The sensory world here is intimate and corrosive, the rasp of a saw. I will draw on legal records, military correspondence, and travelers' reports to describe how captives were processed, stripped of symbols, paraded, sometimes left days as warning, while noting where chroniclers exaggerate and where survivors' testimonies cannot be recovered. This chapter also attends to scale and intent. Was the impalement public spectacle, judicial sentence, or a terror tactic aimed at breaking an invader's will? The answer is often all three. We will consider the role of intermediaries, local officials, executioners, and soldiers who translated command into flesh, and we will look at the economics of terror, who paid for the polls, who profited from confiscated goods, and how estates were sometimes cleared in the eddies of reprisal. Where sources diverge about method or frequency, I will be explicit. offering historians judgment when appropriate and labeling folklore where it appears. The point is not to linger in gore, but to insist on responsibility. Systems need hands, and those hands belonged to men and women who made a ruler's decision a daily reality. These were not monoliths of threat. They were neighbors, sons, and fathers whose removal rewove a community's fabric in ways that ordinary chronicles rarely record. Imagine a cottage emptied of a husband, a market stall closed because its owner was taken at dawn, the widow counting a meager harvest while a row of stakes looms beyond the fields. I will reconstruct ordinary lives from fragmentary sources, local charters, tax records, and the occasional epitaph, while being careful to mark where imagination fills gaps. This chapter will also examine the social mechanisms that made certain people more vulnerable, constellations of rivalry among boyars in the voivod, reprisals against Ottoman sympathizers, and the dangers of being suspected, true guilt not required. We will touch on the exile of families, the seizure of property, and the long-term demographic echoes that such purges could leave. Where personal testimony survives, it often does in the margins, a merchant's ledger with an X beside a name that stopped appearing, a church register noting a widow's petition. Those small traces, when woven together, give us the human ledger the official records omit. The forest of stakes was a landscape of political signaling. Its hollows became the private geography of loss. Vlad's use of terror intersected with the era's brutal realpolitik, the Ottoman expansion under Mehmed II, shifting alliances with Hungarian magnates, and the constant commerce that crossed the Danube. Fear was transmissible. Word of impalement traveled with traders and envoys, versions of events, into Western Europe, helping build the image of a ruler both feared and fetishized. This chapter will be candid about sources. Some foreign reports amplified horror to sell pamphlets or justify intervention. Ottoman chroniclers emphasized treachery to rationalize campaigns. Wallachian registers sometimes underplayed internal strife. The result is a picture of terror as instrument and mirror, a policy that projected authority inward and broadcast a warning outward, while provoking the exact imperial attention a smaller principality might have hoped to avoid. Bram Stoker's imaginative grafting of name and motif onto Victorian anxieties is one thread. Romantic nationalist appropriations in the 19th and 20th centuries are another. I will explore how differing memories compete, local commemorations that remember resistance to Ottoman rule versus international narratives that foreground cruelty and the grotesque. This chapter also wrestles with ethics. How should historians and audiences reckon with a past where acts of extreme violence were entangled with survival under imperial pressure? Where commemoration risks glorification, where fiction risks dehumanization, a careful, compassionate recovery of victims' names and contexts is necessary. The final passages will ask what it means to look at a ruler's forest not merely as spectacle, but as a map of human decisions and costs. Where evidence is sparse, I will flag it. Where claims rest on rumor or later polemic, I will say so. The aim is not to exonerate nor to vilify without basis, but to hold history's complexities, power, fear, resistance, atrocity, in a steady light that lets us hear both the crunch of a boot and the small, private sounds that official accounts often drown out. They planted those stakes not only in earth, but in memory. And what remains when the smoke clears is a landscape of choices. Some brutal policy, some desperate reprisal, some stories shaped by enemies and allies who would later trade truth for terror. We have walked among the polls and tried to listen for the lives that official ledgers and foreign pamphlets often silence. A widow tending a half-acre, while a row of pale faces watched the horizon. A merchant who crossed the Danube with a ledger that stopped noting one name. A boyar whose grievance became the pretext for a reprisal that echoed into ruin. Terrible acts require explanation, but explanation is not excuse. Where chronicles shout, we must whisper the gaps. Mark rumor as rumor and hold the evidence up to the light. Power here was blunt and intimate. The ruler who weaponized fear, the clerks who counted coffers and confiscations, the hands that drove the wood into soil. And the human cost was not only the dead, but the communities remade by dread. How should we remember such a landscape? With honesty that names victims where possible, with skepticism toward lurid pamphlets, and with a respect that refuses to turn suffering into spectacle. If the image of those forests lingers with you, tell me which face you keep seeing. And if you want more histories that listen for the small, private sounds beneath grand narratives, like, subscribe, and return. We will lift another veil together.